although it doesn't really feel like spring outside today, but our spring lecture series. Before I turn it over to Alberto Vargas, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. I'm not sure if any of you have been on our new and improved website. We launched it last fall, but we have been having some issues with our online calendar that normally displays on there all of our events. We are working on that, and by next week it will be fixed, but right now if you click on the home page to upcoming events, it'll take you to another page that shows you our calendar. So there is a way to get to it, and of course if you're on our listserv, we send out our weekly event news blast anyways with all of our events. I just wanted to mention that on the back corner there is a sign-in sheet. If you're not on the listserv, there's information about our various academic programs as well as funding that we offer. Also, and Jack may want to mention this as well or talk about if anybody has any questions, but they are seeking several interns for their office with the Colombia Support Network. And the deadline was yesterday, but they've extended it to Friday, and there's some information there for anybody that might be interested in that and applying. It's going to be run through the International Internships Office on campus. They're handling the application process, but I'm sure Jack would be happy to talk to any students that might be interested. So thanks so much for coming, and turn it over to Alberto.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jack Laun. Jack is an attorney, and he's also the president of Colombia Support Network, a group that we founded with Cecilia Zarate in 1987. Jack is obtained a degree from Harvard University in American History and a law degree from Stanford University. He spent 2 years in Panama in Peace Corps, and then he came back and got his master's in Latin American history.
Latin American history.
And he taught at political science department at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá. And we're very happy to have him here today to talk about a very timely topic, the election of Evo Morales in Bolivia.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you all. I want to begin by describing a little bit what this delegation was like. I was there with the National Lawyers Guild delegation. We went, first of all, to Cochabamba and talked to some political figures, some social leaders there to get an idea of what the underlying situation was politically and socially in Bolivia. And then we went to La Paz and spent several days there before the election. We were there for election day. On election day, our group, which was 12 persons, 12 lawyers or paralegals, we split up and went to 3 different locations to observe the voting. I happened to go to a location, a couple of high schools that we went to in El Alto, which is actually Bolivia's largest city. It's just up the mountain from La Paz. Another group went to a small rural community, and another stayed in La Paz and did their observations there. We went as official observers. I have my official credential here from the Bolivian government, and so we had to go and really observe what was going on and then produce a report. The idea was to observe the elections at different places where we could go. As I say, we went to 3 different places in the La Paz area. And then write a report on that and submit that report, publish that report, whatever. It was important for us to observe how the elections were conducted. And it was important for us then to determine whether there were things that we observed that could have been better, or whether this was a free and fair election and one that should be given every support internationally as a fair election. I think I'll start by just indicating what we saw there. In Cochabamba, where we spent our first days, there were 55,600 tables, election tables, voting spaces, and those were divided into 240 persons per each one. That's true throughout the country. That was what they were supposed to have, basically. There was no traveling on election day. Automobiles were not permitted to travel except with a special permit. We did have a special permit because we were going to do election observing, and we needed to go up to, in my case, up to El Alto. We started in La Paz, in the hotel in La Paz, and we went up to El Alto. But other than that, there were no cars on the roads. So it's rather unusual. And people in Bolivia, voting is required. And those who do not vote will have to pay, the amount was 433 Bolivianos, which is about $62 of U.S. money, in U.S. money. If you don't vote, you're going to get fined. There is a registry, and it's a biometric registry, which people are required to, or which people do before election day. And all of that process, I think, works quite well, really. The thing that we noticed is that there wasn't a lot of space in some of these election precincts, areas where we were located. Some of them were very crowded. You have 240 people supposedly coming into a room in a schoolhouse, and it got kind of crowded in there. But people were very much interested in voting, very patient, and there was a certain excitement about voting. People really took it seriously, and I think that's a very good sign. The other thing that was a problem in the voting places was that they had a notary public, which was supposed to be there to provide information for each few voting places. And these were mostly, the places that were voting where I reviewed it was in the school rooms. And so they had a school that was set aside for voting that day. And then they had the school divided up into classrooms. I think there were 21 in the school I went to, high school in El Alto. And so you would go into you would have an assignment to go to a particular voting place. The problem with the selection of the voting places is that people weren't too well informed about just where they had to go. So they would come to the school, and then they would not know which classroom they would be assigned to go and voting. The government did put up a list that showed the person's name and then where they would go to vote, which school room. That was a process that didn't work too well. If a person had a question, they were to go to these notaries who were present to try to talk to them about, give them whatever guidance they needed as to where they could vote. There were probably not enough of those, and they weren't well enough organized. Other than that, the voting was, I think, very well done. I spent a good deal of time in a voting place in one of the school rooms. I went in there, and they allowed me to sit down and observe. International observers are welcome. They also welcome people from the parties, and from time to time people would come in from the political parties and sit there and watch the votes, watch the voting process. The voting process there is that people would take a ballot, and I have a small example here. It shows the different parties. There were 5 parties that were running in the Movimiento the Movimiento Socialista, which is the movement towards socialism. That's the MAS party. That was Evo Morales' party. And that party did very well in the elections. It did well in the place where we were located. What they did is they took these ballots, and then the person puts the ballot in the box. And that process was a little bit difficult because there were a lot of people, and there wasn't a lot of room for them. But once that was done and the election was completed, the time ran out, and this was the last election ran until 4 p.m. At 4 p.m. the polls closed, except that if there was someone in line, that person could vote. They would take everyone who was in line still at 4 o'clock. And some of those places were still counting votes or taking votes in well after 4 o'clock. But once the voting line had been completed and the time had come and there were no more votes, then interestingly, the polling place was open to the public, and anyone could come in there and observe the way they voted. And what they did is one person would take a vote, would take the vote from the box where it was located and open it up and read the selection of the person, whichever party it was, whichever person they were voting for, and then give that to another person who would look at it and make sure that that was right, and then they would indicate what vote that was, who was it for. And that, I think that process worked very well. And I was there, I actually took note of the votes, and I kept track while I was going along, and they did a very good job. At the end, the summary was perfectly in accord with what I had noted and written down as we were going along. So I think the process was very good. They also allow Bolivians in other countries to vote. Anyone who had registered to vote could vote. There is not a registration by party. It's not as in this country where people vote as Republicans or Democrats or Independents. There is no registration by party. The voter rolls are closed on July 20th, and election day in this case was October 12th, which is a significant day in the Americas, of course, being the anniversary of Columbus' arrival in the Americas. It was not celebrated there as an important day for this day. The importance was the election. But there is a good deal a good deal of pride among the indigenous people there that their society and their culture is being recognized. And of course, the president is an Aymara indigenous, and that's a source of real pride to people. That's one of the things I noticed there, that people are really very upbeat about the fact that this is a society where someone who's an indigenous, from an indigenous society can become president. And of course, in this election, Evo Morales carried 60% of the vote. And his party, MAS, carried enough votes to have control of the legislative body with 2/3 votes. And so that's a situation which could open up the future for Morales if he'd want to amend the Constitution. There's some interest in amending the Constitution. President Morales says he doesn't intend to amend the Constitution. The reason for amending the Constitution might be to give him another term. He became president with the first term in 2005. He became president, and he served a term from 2006 to 2011, and was reelected in 2010 for a second term. And this would have been his third term, except that the Bolivian Constitution, a new Constitution, was adopted in 2010, 2011, and that provided for 2 terms. So whereas Morales said he initially didn't intend to run for election, this election, he decided he could run, and one of the candidates objected to that, but the tribunal decided that this would be a second term for him, because a second term under the Constitution, even though it's really his third term as president. So, at any rate, our review of this situation and the way in which the election was carried out was that it was a fair election. It was well run. I'm going to ask the people here. I don't know if anyone else knows of a place where elections are run on Tuesdays. As far as I know, the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, runs them on Sundays, and that was, of course, the case in Bolivia. It's also a national holiday, so nobody had to go to work, really. And people had to walk because there was no automobile transportation allowed within 48 hours of the voting. People had to act over 24 hours of the time the voting occurred. People had to walk if they had to get to an election place, and a lot of people were walking. So we saw a lot of people walking, and it was very calm, and there was a very good attitude among the people. And I think everything worked out very well as far as the fairness of the election was concerned. Of course, as I say, Evo Morales won another term as president. It's a 5-year term. beginning just a little while ago on January 21st, January 2nd. And 21st there was a ceremony at which he was honored as the winning candidate, and then the next day he took the oath of office and became president for the next 5 years. There are some things I think that are very significant about Evo Morales' victory. As I think you know, Bolivia is one of the countries that has really established an independent relationship from the United States. And this happened in a couple of ways. Evo Morales indicated, after becoming president, that the United States government had been trying to interfere. This is not something that only happened in Bolivia, or that the United States only attempted in Bolivia. The United States attempting to influence the government by working to promote those who were in opposition to the government, basically those who favored a system of a neoliberal system, basically, with the capitalism being promoted. Capitalism being promoted. That's an idea different from what the Bolivians have with Evo Morales. So I think that this is Morales' election is part of an effort on the part of several countries, particularly Venezuela, Ecuador, and I can say here that those are countries that have, in South America, that have tried to take an independent stance, so that they're not really sustained by this idea that they're working in the backyard of the United States. The United States is under the Monroe Doctrine, is responsible for carrying out the policies in this hemisphere. When Evo Morales determined that, through what evidence I'm not sure, but he determined that the U.S. government representatives in his country, particularly Philip Goldberg, the ambassador, were engaging in activities to promote the opposition to Morales. He sent the U.S. ambassador home. And then, when our Secretary of State, John Kerry, unfortunately, back in April of last year, I believe it was April of 2013, was unfortunate enough to use the term backyard when he was referring to relationships with he hoped the United States would have with Latin America. Evo Morales sent the USAID office, he closed it, sent it home to the United States, no more AID. Again, with the idea that this was something that was promoting the opposition, as I think we've seen happen in other countries, promoting the opposition to the Morales government and the socialist government that Morales was promoting. So right at this point, there is no U.S. ambassador in Bolivia. We did meet at a party that was held for those of us who were there as official observers. We did meet I did meet the current charge of affairs. His name is Peter Brennan, and he has some background back in. He told me he came in from Pakistan, but he's been elsewhere in Latin America, and I think kind of working to promote opposition to socialist governments through things like AID and the programs that have developed in these countries. Bolivia has joined the ALBA, which is the Bolivian Alliance for the Peoples of Latin America, is its formal name. Member countries include Bolivia, Cuba, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, and a number of small countries in the Caribbean. And this is an attempt to create a common bond, and they've actually talked about having a single currency, which would be the sucre, for all of these countries. It hasn't developed into having this.
Our speaker today, Jack Laun. Jack is an attorney, and he's also the president of Colombia Support Network, a group that we founded with Cecilia Zarate in 1987. Jack is obtained a degree from Harvard University in American History and a law degree from Stanford University. He spent 2 years in Panama in Peace Corps, and then he
for their office with the Colombia Support Network. And the deadline was yesterday, but they've extended it to Friday, and there's some information there for anybody that might be interested in that and applying. It's going to be run through the International Internships Office on campus. They're handling the application process, but I'm sure Jack would be happy to talk to any students that might be interested. So thanks so much for coming, and turn it over to Alberto.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce him back and got his master's in Latin America, in Latin American history.
American history.
And he taught at Political Science Department at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá. And we're very happy to have him here today to talk about a very timely topic, the election of Evo Morales in Bolivia.
Thank you very much, Alberto.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all.
Although it doesn't really feel like spring outside today, but our spring lecture series. Before I turn it over to Alberto Vargas, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. I'm not sure if any of you have been on our new and improved website. We launched it last fall, but we have been having some issues with our online calendar that normally displays on there all of our events. We are working on that, and by next week it will be fixed, but right now if you click on the home page to upcoming events, it'll take you to another page that shows you our calendar. So there is a way to get to it, and of course if you're on our listserv, we send out our weekly event news blast anyways with all of our events. I just wanted to mention that on the back corner there is a sign-in sheet. If you're not on the listserv, there's information about our various academic programs as well as funding that we offer. Also, and Jack may want to mention this as well or talk about if anybody has any questions, but they are seeking several interns